In the harsh territories of 1880s Wyoming, desperation drove people to make choices they never thought possible. Jackson Miller was no exception. With a bounty on his head and the law closing in, he made the most unconventional decision of his life to marry Eleanor Blackwood, a 68-year-old widow who owned the most successful stagecoach line in the territory. What began as a marriage of convenience soon unraveled into something neither of them expected when Jackson discovered the dark secrets of Eleanor's past, a past that would change everything he thought he knew about the woman who saved him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bitter wind howled across the plains as Jackson Miller huddled behind a boulder, clutching his wounded side. At 32, he'd spent nearly a decade running from the law. But this time felt different. The bounty hunters were getting closer, and his options were running out fast. "Damn it all," he muttered, checking his revolver. 2 bullets left. Not enough to fight his way out, and certainly not enough to start a new life somewhere else. The wound in his side wasn't helping matters. Though not fatal, it bled enough to leave a trail any amateur tracker could follow. Jackson wasn't always an outlaw. Before the war, he'd been a ranch hand, with dreams of saving enough to buy his own piece of land. But the Civil War changed everything. After Gettysburg, he returned to find his employer dead and the new owner unwilling to honor old agreements. One heated argument, one fatal mistake, and Jackson Miller became a wanted man. For 9 years, he'd managed to stay one step ahead of the law. Small robberies here and there kept him fed, though he never became the hardened criminal the wanted posters made him out to be. He avoided killing whenever possible, which is why his current predicament felt so unjust. The bullet in his side came from a trigger-happy deputy who hadn't bothered to ask questions first. As darkness fell over the Wyoming territory, Jackson made his way toward the lights of Copper Creek. The small settlement wasn't much, a general store, a saloon, a modest church, and a handful of homes, but it represented his last hope. He needed shelter, medical attention, and most importantly, a way to disappear. The Blackwood Stagecoach Company depot sat on the outskirts of town, a surprisingly substantial building with connected stables large enough to house 12 coaches, and twice as many horses. Despite the late hour, lights still burned inside. Jackson hesitated. Breaking in meant risking being shot on sight, but freezing to death wasn't an appealing alternative. He found a side entrance unlocked and slipped inside. The warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of leather, horses, and lamp oil. He planned to find a quiet corner in the stables to rest until morning, when a voice stopped him cold. "I've been expecting someone like you for some time now," came a woman's voice, weathered but strong, "though I must say, you're in worse shape than I anticipated." Jackson whirled around, reaching for his gun, but the sudden movement sent a streak of pain through his side. Standing before him was a woman who defied easy description. Though clearly advanced in years, she stood straight-backed and dignified. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her face bore the lines of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions. Despite her age, there was something formidable about her presence. "Eleanor Blackwood," she said, not bothering to introduce herself, as though everyone should know who she was. "Owner of the Blackwood Stagecoach line, and you're bleeding all over my floor." Jackson swayed on his feet. "I'm not looking for trouble, ma'am." "No, you're looking for a place to hide. The question is, what are you hiding from?" Her eyes narrowed, taking in his worn clothes, the blood seeping through his shirt, and the exhaustion written across his face. "Doesn't matter. You'll be dead by morning if that wound isn't tended to." To Jackson's surprise, she didn't call for help or reach for a weapon. Instead, she locked the door behind her and gestured for him to follow. "Come along. The office has a cot." Too weak to argue, Jackson followed. The office was a spacious, room with a large desk covered in ledgers and maps. A small stove in the corner kept the space warm, and a cot was indeed set up against one wall. "Sit," she commanded, retrieving a wooden box from a cabinet. "Remove your shirt." Under normal circumstances, Jackson would have refused, but Normal had fled his life long ago. He complied, wincing as the dried blood made the fabric stick to his wound. Eleanor worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the bullet graze with whiskey that made Jackson bite back a curse. "Just a flesh wound," she declared. "You're luckier than you deserve to be." "Why are you helping me?" Jackson asked, as she wrapped clean bandages around his torso. Eleanor's hands paused momentarily. "Let's just say I recognize a desperate soul when I see one." She finished her work and stepped back. "Now, since you're not dying anymore, perhaps you can make yourself useful." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I run the largest stagecoach line in the territory, with exactly 3 reliable employees, all of whom are currently away on routes. I need another pair of hands, particularly ones that know their way around horses. You don't even know my name." "I know you're running from something. I know you have experience with manual labor based on those calluses, and I know you're not stupid enough to bite the hand offering you shelter." She crossed her arms. "So, do you have a name, or shall I make one up?" Despite everything, Jackson found himself smiling slightly. Jackson Miller. "Well, Mr. Miller, here's my proposition. Work for me, and you'll have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and a modest wage. The law doesn't look too closely at my operation, for reasons I won't bore you with. You'll be safer here than anywhere else within 100 miles. It sounded too good to be true, and in Jackson's experience, that meant it usually was. "What's the catch?" Eleanor's lips thinned. "The catch, Mr. Miller, is that I need more than just a worker. I need protection." Jackson frowned. "Protection? From what? Not what. Who?" Eleanor moved to her desk and pulled out a letter. "My late husband's nephew believes himself entitled to my business. His attempts to persuade me have become increasingly aggressive. The local sheriff is in his pocket, which limits my options." Understanding dawned slowly. "So you want me to be what? A bodyguard?" Eleanor's laugh was short and sharp. "In a manner of speaking, what I propose is a marriage of convenience." Jackson nearly fell off the cot. "Marriage? Ma'am, with all due respect—" "Save your objections," she cut him off. "I'm offering you legitimacy, Mr. Miller. A new name, a new identity. As my husband, no one would question your presence, and your past would be effectively erased. In return, your presence would deter my nephew-in-law from his more direct approaches." Jackson stared at the woman before him, trying to comprehend the offer. "You'd marry a complete stranger, a wounded outlaw who broke into your property." Eleanor's eyes, a startling clear blue despite her age, met his without wavering. "I've survived. 68 years in this world, Mr. Miller, most of them on my own terms. I built this business from nothing after my husband died, fought off competitors, outlaws, and economic downturns. I didn't do all that to have Thomas Caldwell steal it from me now." She approached him again, her expression softening slightly. "I'm not looking for romance, Mr. Miller. I've had my share of that in this life. What I'm offering is a practical arrangement that benefits us both." Jackson closed his eyes, weighing his options. They were admittedly few. With a price on his head and a wound that would slow him down, his chances of escaping the territory were slim. And there was something about Eleanor Blackwood that inspired, if not trust, then at least a willingness to take a chance. "How would this work exactly?" Eleanor nodded, seemingly pleased with his consideration. "We marry quietly, with only my lawyer present. I'll introduce you as a former business associate of my late husband's, recently widowed yourself, who assisted me during a difficult time. Your new identity will be established, your past forgotten. And if your nephew-in-law doesn't back down," a shadow crossed Eleanor's face, "then we deal with that when the time comes." Jackson studied her, sensing there was more to the story than she was sharing. "Why me? Why not hire actual protection? You clearly have the means." "Hired guns have divided loyalties, Mr. Miller. A husband, however, has a vested interest in his wife's well-being." She paused. "Besides, there's something about you. Despite your current circumstances, I sense you're a man with certain principles." The irony wasn't lost on Jackson, an outlaw with principles, yet he couldn't deny there were lines he'd never crossed, even at his most desperate. "If I agree," he said slowly, "I want something clear from the start. I won't kill you unless there's no other choice." Eleanor's expression remained unreadable. "I'm not asking you to be an assassin, Mr. Miller, just a deterrent." Jackson took a deep breath. "All right, Mrs. Blackwood, you have yourself a deal." 3 days later, in the quiet confines of lawyer Matthew Harrington's office, Jackson Miller became Jackson Blackwood, husband to Eleanor Blackwood and co-owner of the Blackwood Stagecoach line. The ceremony, if it could be called that, lasted less than 5 minutes. No vows of love or devotion were exchanged, only practical promises of partnership and protection. As they left the lawyer's office, Eleanor handed Jackson a small stack of papers. "Your new identity. Memorize the details. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." According to his new life story, Jackson Blackwood was a 32-year-old widower from Missouri who had known Eleanor's late husband during his business travels. After losing his wife to influenza and falling on hard times, he had sought out Eleanor for potential employment, rekindling an old friendship that blossomed into an unexpected romance. "Romantic," Jackson commented dryly. "Practical," Eleanor corrected. "People love a story about late-in-life romance. They'll be too busy gossiping about the age difference to question your sudden appearance." True to Eleanor's prediction, the people of Copper Creek seemed more intrigued than suspicious. About her new husband, some raised eyebrows at the age gap, others whispered about fortune hunters, but most accepted the story at face value. Jackson found himself settling into a routine at the Stagecoach Company, overseeing operations and learning the business under Eleanor's exacting tutelage. For the first time in years, he slept without one eye open, ate regular meals, and wore clothes that weren't threadbare. If anyone recognized him from wanted posters, they kept it to themselves. In Copper Creek, he was simply Mr. Blackwood, the older Mrs. Blackwood's surprisingly capable new husband. But as Jackson was soon to discover, his new life came with complications he couldn't have anticipated. The more he learned about Eleanor Blackwood, the more questions arose. Why did she really marry him? What was she hiding beneath her practical, business-like exterior? And most importantly, who was the mysterious visitor who arrived at the depot late one night, clearly familiar with Eleanor but unknown to anyone else in Copper Creek? The answers, when they came, would shake the foundations of Jackson's newfound security and force him to confront not only Eleanor's past, but his own. The mysterious visitor arrived on a moonless night 3 weeks after Jackson and Eleanor's arrangement began. Jackson had been inspecting the coaches for the next day's routes when he heard voices from Eleanor's office, hers tense but controlled, and another, male and insistent. Jackson moved silently toward the partially open door. Years of outlaw life had taught him when to intercede and when to gather information first. "You can't just show up like this, Daniel," Eleanor was saying. "We have an arrangement." "Arrangements change," the man replied. His voice carried the refined tones of Eastern education, but with an underlying hardness. "Especially when I hear you've suddenly acquired a husband, a rather young one, from what I understand." Jackson peered through the crack in the door. The visitor, Daniel, was tall and lean, perhaps 50, with prematurely silver hair and an expensive suit that looked out of place in Copper Creek. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My personal life is none of your concern," Eleanor replied coolly. Daniel laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Everything about you is my concern, Eleanor. Or have you forgotten?" Jackson had heard enough. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, making a show of casualness he didn't feel. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" Both turned to look at him. Eleanor with surprise that quickly shifted to something like relief, and Daniel with narrow-eyed assessment. "Ah," Daniel said softly. "The new husband, I presume." Eleanor composed herself quickly. "Jackson, this is Daniel Hargrove, an old business associate. Daniel, my husband, Jackson Blackwood." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Blackwood? How convenient." Jackson extended his hand, forcing Daniel to either accept it or show obvious rudeness. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel shook it briefly. "A pleasure," Daniel said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Eleanor rarely mentioned family back east. I had no idea she was considering remarriage." "Life is full of surprises," Jackson replied evenly. "Indeed it is." Daniel's gaze was assessing, searching for weaknesses. "I wonder, Mr. Blackwood, how much Eleanor has told you about her past endeavors?" Before Jackson could respond, Eleanor cut in. "Daniel was just leaving. He has a train to catch back to Chicago." "Actually," Daniel said, "I've taken a room at the hotel. I have some business in the area that may keep me in Copper Creek for a few days." He smiled thinly. "Perhaps we could all dine together tomorrow evening? I'd love to get better acquainted with Eleanor's new husband." The invitation felt like a trap, but refusing would only heighten suspicion. "We'd be delighted," Jackson said before Eleanor could object. After Daniel departed, Eleanor poured herself a generous glass of whiskey, something Jackson had never seen her do before. "Who is he really?" Jackson asked. Eleanor took a long sip before answering. "Daniel Hargrove is many things, a businessman, a blackmailer, and unfortunately a man who knows too much about my past." "What does he have on you?" "Enough to destroy everything I've built." She set down her glass. "This is precisely why I needed our arrangement, Jackson. Daniel has been patient until now, but he's a man who recognizes opportunity. My marriage would seem like a threat to his plans, which are to eventually take control of my company." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Jackson detected the underlying tension. "He believes I'm vulnerable as an aging widow. Your presence complicates things for him." Jackson considered this, and Thomas Caldwell, your nephew-in-law. "A separate problem, but not unrelated," Eleanor sighed. "Thomas is Daniel's unwitting pawn in many ways. Daniel has been feeding his sense of entitlement, encouraging him to pressure me." "You've been playing a dangerous game, Eleanor." Her smile was thin. "My entire life has been a dangerous game, Mr. Miller." The use of his real name was deliberate, a reminder of their mutual vulnerabilities. "Well then," Jackson said, pouring himself a small whiskey, "I believe we should prepare for dinner tomorrow. After all, I should know more about my wife's past. If I'm to be convincing." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "Very well, but not here. The walls in town have ears." The following morning, they took one of the smaller coaches out to a remote overlook that provided a sweeping view of the territory. The autumn air carried a chill that promised an early winter, but the sun provided enough warmth to make their isolated conversation comfortable. "I wasn't always Eleanor Blackwood," she began, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "I was born Eleanor Sutton in Baltimore in 1812. My father was a respected physician, my mother from a good family. I was educated better than most girls of my time, trained to be an ideal wife for some ambitious young man." Jackson noticed how her accent had subtly shifted, revealing traces of Eastern refinement she normally kept hidden. "At 18, I married Charles Hammond, a promising lawyer, 15 years my senior. By 21, I was widowed when cholera took him. Charles left me comfortable but not wealthy. I could have returned to my parents, lived the quiet life of a young widow, perhaps remarried eventually. She paused, and Jackson resisted the urge to prompt her. Whatever she was building toward, she needed to tell it in her own way. Instead, I discovered I had a talent my father never suspected. I could forge almost any document, signatures, bank drafts, legal papers. What began as an amusement became a means of supporting myself. I was careful, meticulous. I created a new identity, Elizabeth Porter, and began offering my services discreetly to those who needed certain paperwork problems resolved. Jackson couldn't hide his surprise. "You were a forger, one of the best," she said, without pride or shame. "For nearly a decade I operated in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York. I was selective about my clients, charged substantial fees, and maintained an impeccable reputation as a widowed seamstress by day. What happened? The Civil War happened. Suddenly my skills were in high demand for both sides. The Confederacy needed banknotes, bonds, and documentation for spies. The Union wanted the same. I found myself in a position of unexpected power and danger." She turned to face him directly. "I chose the Union, Mr. Miller, not out of patriotism, but practicality. I began working with the Treasury Department, helping identify and counter Confederate forgeries while occasionally producing specialized documents for Union intelligence operations." "That's how you met Daniel?" Eleanor nodded. "Daniel Hargrove was an ambitious young Treasury agent. He discovered my dual identity by accident. Instead of arresting me, he recognized my value. We formed a partnership of sorts." I continued. "My work for the Union. He received credit for various counterintelligence successes, and occasionally we collaborated on ventures outside official channels." "You were lovers," Jackson stated, seeing the connection. "Briefly," Eleanor admitted. "But Daniel and I were both practical people. The relationship served its purpose until it didn't. After the war, I wanted to leave that life behind. Daniel had other ideas. He'd developed a taste for the power and profit my skills provided." She produced a silver flask from her coat pocket and took a small sip. "I fled west, using my wartime earnings to establish a new life. I became Eleanor Pierce, a war widow seeking a fresh start. In St. Louis, I met Harold Blackwood, a middle-aged entrepreneur with dreams of expanding his modest freight business into the territories." Jackson began to see the pieces fitting together. "You married him for cover." "Initially, yes," Eleanor acknowledged. "But Harold was a good man, kind, hard-working, respected. We built the Stagecoach business together, expanded routes, secured government mail contracts. When he died 15 years ago, I continued his legacy. And Daniel found you again." Eleanor's expression hardened. 8 years ago, he'd risen through the ranks to become a senior official in the Treasury Department, responsible for investigating financial crimes throughout the Western Territories. Pure coincidence brought him to investigate a counterfeiting operation in Denver. He recognized my handwriting on a shipping manifest. "Blackmail," Jackson concluded. "He prefers to call it insurance. Every year he receives a substantial payment from me. In return, my past remains buried. But now he wants more than money." Eleanor nodded grimly. "Daniel is approaching retirement. A Stagecoach company with government mail contracts would provide a comfortable future and respectable cover for other ventures he has planned." Jackson stood, processing everything he'd heard. The woman before him had lived multiple lives, each built on deception, yet somehow culminating in legitimate success. She was a criminal, yes, but also a survivor who'd carved out a life against considerable odds, in that they were not so different. "Why tell me all this?" he finally asked. "Because Daniel will try to drive a wedge between us. He'll present himself as a concerned old friend, worried about an elderly woman being taken advantage of by a younger opportunist. He'll hint at revelations about my past, perhaps even suggest a more equitable arrangement with you. Jackson understood. He'll try to turn me against you. Or buy you off, Eleanor added. Daniel excels at finding people's weaknesses. And what does he think mine is? Eleanor's gaze was unflinching. Money, freedom, a clean slate, all the things I've already offered, but without being tied to an old woman. The dinner with Daniel that evening took place in the private dining room of Copper Creek's only hotel. The atmosphere was superficially cordial, with Daniel playing the role of charming raconteur, sharing sanitized stories of his government career and his supposed long friendship with Eleanor. I must say, Daniel commented as the main course was served, the Blackwood Stagecoach line has become quite the empire under Eleanor's guidance. Harold would be proud. It's impressive, Jackson agreed, though Eleanor is too modest about her own contributions, Daniel smiled. Yes, she's always had a remarkable talent for paperwork, the contracts, the ledgers, the precise documentation that keeps a business running smoothly. The double meaning wasn't lost on Jackson. Every successful enterprise requires attention to detail. Indeed, Daniel turned to Ellen. Which reminds me, I noticed your Central City route has been experiencing delays. The Postal Service is concerned. Eleanor's expression remained pleasant. A temporary issue. We've had trouble with a washout on the mountain pass. Repairs are underway. I would hate to see your mail contracts jeopardized, Daniel said. Perhaps I could put in a good word during my visit to Denver next week. That won't be necessary, Jackson interjected. I've already made arrangements to redirect the route through Settlers Pass until repairs are complete. We'll meet all delivery. Schedules. Daniel's surprise was barely perceptible. I'm impressed, Mr. Blackwood. You've adapted quickly to the stagecoach business. Jackson has extensive experience with logistics, Eleanor said smoothly. His fresh perspective has been invaluable. The conversation continued with similar exchanges, Daniel probing for weaknesses, Jackson and Eleanor presenting a united front. As dessert was served, Daniel steered the conversation toward more personal territory. Tell me, Jackson, how did you and Eleanor reconnect after all these years? She mentioned you knew Harold. Briefly, Jackson replied, sticking to their established story. I was handling freight arrangements for a mining company in Missouri when our paths crossed. Harold spoke often of Eleanor and the business they were building. And after your wife passed, my condolences, by the way, you sought out Eleanor? It wasn't quite so calculated, Jackson said with a smile. I had business in the territory and thought to pay my respects. One thing led to another. How romantic, Daniel said, his tone suggesting anything but. And now you're partners in every sense. Life takes unexpected turns, Eleanor commented, though I suspect you didn't come all this way to discuss our marriage, Daniel. Daniel dabbed his mouth with his napkin. Direct as always, Eleanor. Well, I've been considering my future plans. Retirement from government service approaches, and I find myself drawn to the transportation business. A stagecoach line of your own, Jackson suggested innocently. Why start from scratch when investment in an established enterprise makes more sense? Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm prepared to make a generous offer for a 50% stake in Blackwood Stagecoach. Eleanor's laugh was genuine. Daniel, you know that's impossible. The company is family-owned. And family can be complicated, Daniel replied, especially when certain relatives might have concerns about recent developments. The threat regarding Thomas Caldwell was thinly veiled. Before Eleanor could respond, Jackson leaned forward. Mr. Hargrove, I appreciate directness in business matters, so let me be equally direct. The Blackwood Stagecoach line is not for sale, in whole or in part. Any concerns from extended family have been addressed through appropriate legal channels. Daniel's expression cooled. I see Eleanor has found a formidable advocate. Perhaps we should discuss this more privately, man to man. I believe I could make you an offer that might appeal to your personal circumstances." Jackson smiled. "My circumstances are quite satisfactory, thank you." The remainder of the evening maintained a veneer of civility, but the battle lines had been clearly drawn. As they prepared to leave, Daniel pulled Jackson aside briefly. "Consider my offer, Mr. Blackwood, or whatever your real name might be. Eleanor's past contains chapters you can't imagine. When she's no longer useful to you, I can provide a far more lucrative exit than anything she's promised." Jackson met his gaze steadily. "Good night, Mr. Hargrove." On the ride back to their home, Eleanor remained silent until they were safely inside. "He'll move against us now," she said finally. "Daniel doesn't accept rejection well." "What's his next play?" "Thomas Caldwell," Eleanor said wearily. "He'll accelerate whatever plans they've been developing." As if summoned by her words, a knock came at the door. Jackson opened it to find one of their drivers, breathless and agitated. "Mr. Blackwood, there's trouble at the depot. Mr. Caldwell showed up with the sheriff and some paperwork. Says he's taking possession of 3 coaches for unpaid debts." Eleanor's face went white. "It's beginning." The Blackwood depot was illuminated by lanterns when they arrived. Thomas Caldwell, a florid-faced man in his 40s with an ill-fitting suit and a sense of self-importance, stood beside Sheriff Dodson. 3 of the company's newest coaches were being hitched to teams of horses. "Eleanor," Thomas called out with mock sympathy, "I'm just collecting on Harold's outstanding loans. The paperwork all in order." Eleanor strode forward, Jackson at her side. "What outstanding loans? Harold never borrowed money from you." Sheriff Dodson held up a sheaf of papers. "Got the loan documents right here, Mrs. Blackwood. Signed by Harold himself, witnessed and notarized. You've been in default for months according to these notices." Jackson recognized a familiar scheme. Forged documents, a corrupt official, a straw man as the public face. Daniel Hargrove was moving faster than anticipated. "These documents are fraudulent," Eleanor declared. "My husband never borrowed money from Thomas." "Now that's a serious accusation," the sheriff said. "Mr. Caldwell here has proper documentation. Unless you can prove otherwise, I'm obliged to help him recover his property." Jackson stepped forward. "Sheriff, I'd like to examine those documents." Reluctantly, Dodson handed them over. Jackson studied them carefully, noting the signatures, the dates, the specific language. "These were supposedly signed 3 months before Harold Blackwood's death?" he asked. "That's right," Thomas said smugly. "Uncle Harold knew his business was struggling. Too proud to tell his wife, of course." Jackson handed the papers to Eleanor. "Interesting," he said, "especially since the watermark on this paper wasn't used by the territorial court until 2 years after Harold died." Sheriff Dodson frowned. "What watermark?" "This one." Jackson held the paper up to a lantern, revealing the faint design. "I worked with official documentation in Missouri. This is the revised territorial seal implemented in 1870. These documents are dated 1868. The sheriff's confidence wavered. "Now wait a minute." "Additionally," Jackson continued, "the notary stamp belongs to Theodore Williams, who didn't receive his commission until 1871. I suggest you verify these facts before proceeding, Sheriff. False documentation in a legal proceeding is a serious offense." Thomas Caldwell's face reddened further. "This is absurd. The sheriff has already validated." "I think," Eleanor interrupted, "we should take this matter to Judge Wilson in the morning. I'm sure he'd be very interested in examining these documents." The mention of the circuit judge, known for his incorruptibility, caused visible discomfort for both Caldwell and the sheriff. "Perhaps," the sheriff said slowly, "we should postpone this action pending further review." Thomas began to protest, but the sheriff silenced him with a glare. "Enough, Thomas. We'll sort this out properly." As the men unhitched the horses and retreated, Eleanor turned to Jackson with newfound respect. "How did you know about the watermark and the notary?" Jackson smiled grimly. I didn't, but I recognized Daniel's hand in this. The documents looked too perfect, typical of professional forgeries. I took a calculated risk. Eleanor's laugh held genuine admiration. Bluffed them with their own game. Daniel will be furious. Good, Jackson said, but this is just the opening move. We need to be prepared for what comes next. Later that night, as they sat in Eleanor's office reviewing the company's legitimate documentation, Jackson posed the question that had been forming since dinner. You could have exposed Daniel years ago. Treasury agents who abuse their position face serious consequences. Eleanor set down her pen. It's not that simple. Daniel has insurance of his own, evidence of my activities during the war, some of which went beyond what the government sanctioned. We've been in a stalemate. Until now, Jackson observed. What changed? Eleanor's expression grew distant. Age, Mr. Miller. I'm 68. Daniel sees me as vulnerable, my faculties potentially diminishing. He believes this is his opportunity to finally claim what he's always wanted. The company? Control, she corrected. Over me, over the business I built, over the life I created for myself. Daniel has always resented that I walked away from him, from the power we wielded together. Jackson considered this. He won't stop with Thomas Caldwell's failed attempt. No, Eleanor agreed, and we must be ready for whatever comes next. Daniel is resourceful, connected, and utterly without scruple. As if confirming her assessment, a rock crashed through the office window, narrowly missing Eleanor's head. Attached was a note. This is your final warning. Sell to Hargrove or worse follows. Jackson picked up the note, his jaw tight. It seems diplomacy has ended. Eleanor's voice was steel. Then let the real battle begin. Dawn broke over Copper Creek with an eerie stillness. Jackson stood at the depot window, watching the quiet street with the vigilance of a man who knew trouble was coming. The rock through the window last night was just the beginning. A crude opening gambit that suggested Daniel Hargrove was losing his patience for subtle manipulation. You should get some rest, Eleanor said, entering the office with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Despite the early hour, she looked composed, her silver hair neatly arranged, her clothing practical but impeccable. Jackson accepted the cup gratefully. I've gone longer without sleep. Yes, I imagine life as an outlaw teaches certain endurance skills. There was no judgment in her tone, merely observation. But we need your wits sharp. Daniel excels at exploiting exhaustion. Their eyes met. Over the rims of their cups, a moment of silent understanding between 2 people who'd survived by their instincts. What's our next move? Jackson asked. Eleanor placed several ledgers on her desk. First, we secure the business against further legal maneuvers. I've spent the night documenting every transaction the company has made in the past 5 years. Judge Wilson arrives this afternoon on the Denver coach. We'll present our case directly. Will the judge believe us over a Treasury official? Eleanor's smile was thin but confident. Wilson and I have history. He knows Thomas Caldwell's character, and he's no friend of Sheriff Dodson. More importantly, he understands territorial law better than anyone. The documents they presented wouldn't withstand his scrutiny, even without your clever bluff. Jackson nodded. And after the legal front is secured, we need to understand what Daniel really wants. Eleanor tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the desk. The company is valuable, yes, but not enough to justify this level of risk for a man in his position. You think there's more at stake? Eleanor's expression darkened. Daniel never acts without multiple motives. The Stagecoach line itself may just be the visible prize. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Martin Calloway, Eleanor's most trusted driver, a weathered man in his 50s who'd been with the company since Harold's time. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, removing his hat, thought you should know. There's men at the hotel loading up to ride out, that Treasury fellow and 4 others, looking like hired guns. Jackson tensed. Heading where? North Trail, from what Clem at the livery said. They loaded up supplies for at least 3 days. Eleanor and Jackson exchanged glances. North of Copper Creek lay only one significant landmark, the high pass route to the mining settlements, the company's most profitable but challenging route. The washout, Eleanor said quietly. It's not a coincidence. After Calloway departed, Jackson spread out the route maps on the desk. Tell me about this washout on High Pass. Spring melt caused a section of the trail to collapse about 10 miles north of town. We've been using Settlers Pass instead, but it adds a day to the journey. Repairs were scheduled to begin next week. Jackson traced the route with his finger. And the mail contract specifies delivery times? Yes. We have a 2-week grace period for using the alternate route due to documented hazardous conditions. After that, penalties begin to accrue. The strategy became clear. Daniel's going to make sure those repairs never happen. If your coaches can't use High Pass, you'll eventually breach contract terms. The Postal Service could terminate your most valuable contract. Eleanor nodded grimly. And with Thomas Caldwell's legitimate claim to partial ownership, he could step in as the responsible party to save the mail route. Jackson grabbed his coat. I need to get to High Pass before them. Not alone, Eleanor countered. Daniel, we'll have hired professional troublemakers. I've dealt with their kind before. So have I. Eleanor reached into a drawer and withdrew a small derringer. And I'm coming with you. Jackson started to object, but the determination in Eleanor's eyes stopped him. This was her company, her life's work at stake. Besides, he suspected arguing would only waste valuable time. We'll take the lightweight coach and the fastest team, he conceded, but you follow my lead when we get there. Within the hour, they were racing north along the road to High Pass, pushing the horses harder than was wise. Eleanor sat beside, Jackson on the driver's bench, a rifle across her lap, and the small derringer tucked in her sleeve. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what confrontation awaited. The washout came into view around noon, a section of road where the mountainside had simply given way, creating a 30-foot gap in the narrow trail. On the far side, barely visible through a spyglass, stood Daniel Hargrove and his men, already setting up what appeared to be demolition charges. They're going to widen the gap, Jackson said, lowering the glass. Make it impossible to repair. Eleanor's face was grim. We need to cross somehow. Once those charges blow, the entire face could collapse. Jackson surveyed the surrounding terrain. There. He pointed to a narrow game trail that wound down into the ravine and up the other side. We might be able to make it on horseback. They left the coach secured and took the 2 lead horses, picking their way carefully down the treacherous path. The descent was nerve-wracking, loose stones skittering away under the horses' hooves, the path sometimes barely wide enough for the animals to pass. Eleanor rode with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades in the saddle, never once complaining about the danger or difficulty. As they neared the bottom of the ravine, a gunshot echoed off the canyon walls. A bullet kicked up dirt near Jackson's horse, causing it to rear in panic. They've spotted us, he called, fighting to control his mount. Eleanor guided her horse behind a large boulder. We need cover. More shots followed as Daniel's men realized. Their operation was compromised. Jackson and Eleanor abandoned their horses in a protected hollow and proceeded on foot, using the abundant rocks and scrub for concealment as they worked their way up the other side of the ravine. Stay down, Jackson whispered as they paused behind an outcropping. I count 4 gunmen plus Daniel. They'll have the charges set by now, Eleanor said. We need to disable them before they can detonate. Jackson studied the terrain, formulating a plan. I'll create a distraction. Circle around to the right, there's a blind spot in their position. Get to those charges if you can. Before she could respond, he squeezed her shoulder briefly and moved away, staying low. Minutes later, a fusillade of gunfire erupted from Jackson's position as he fired at Daniel's men, forcing them to take cover. Eleanor seized the opportunity, scrambling up the slope toward the demolition setup. She reached the first bundle of dynamite as the gunfight intensified, quickly working to disable the fuse connections with practiced hands. Daniel, positioned farther back, suddenly noticed her. "Stop her!" he shouted to his nearest man, who turned and fired in Eleanor's direction. The bullet grazed her arm, but she barely flinched, continuing her work. Jackson, seeing the threat, adjusted his aim and dropped the gunman with a shot to the shoulder. The injured man fell, screaming in pain and distracting the others momentarily. Eleanor had just finished disabling the final charge when Daniel himself appeared before her, a revolver aimed at her chest. "Step away, Eleanor," he commanded. She straightened slowly, blood seeping through her sleeve. "It's over, Daniel. Your plan won't work." "There are always other plans." His smile was cold. "Your young husband is outnumbered. Even if he survives, Sheriff Dodson will be interested to learn his true identity. I've made inquiries, you see. Jackson Miller, wanted for murder in 3 territories. Self-defense," came Jackson's voice from behind Daniel. "But I doubt that matters to you." Daniel turned slightly, keeping his gun trained on Eleanor while acknowledging Jackson's presence. "Mr. Miller, quite the protective husband you've proven to be. I'm almost impressed." "Lower your weapon," Jackson said, his own revolver steady. "Your men have either fled or are incapacitated. It's finished." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "Nothing is ever finished. You of all people should understand that, outlaw. We carry our past with us, always." "That's where you're wrong," Eleanor said quietly. "Some of us build new lives, Daniel. We move forward, while others cling to old grievances," Jackson added. "Old obsessions." Daniel's expression hardened. "You think this is about obsession? This is about what's rightfully mine. We built an empire during the war, Eleanor. Your skills and my connections. The arrangements I made, the risks I took, I deserve my share. You've been taking your share for 8 years, Eleanor countered, bleeding my company dry with your blackmail. A pittance compared to what we could have had together. For a moment, genuine emotion cracked through Daniel's composed facade. "We were unstoppable, Eleanor. The greatest forgers the Treasury Department never caught, and you walked away." Jackson kept his aim steady, but his mind raced to process this new information. Daniel hadn't merely discovered Eleanor's forgery operation. He'd been part of it. A Treasury agent running a counterfeiting scheme during the chaos of the Civil War, using Eleanor's talents while maintaining his government position as cover. "I walked away from corruption," Eleanor said firmly, "from becoming something I despised." Daniel's laugh was harsh. "Says the woman who married an outlaw to protect her interests. We're all corrupt, Eleanor. Some of us are just honest about it." A tense silence fell as the three stood in their fragile standoff, the dynamite charges lying harmless at their feet. In the distance, the sounds of horses approaching echoed through the ravine. "That will be Judge Wilson," Eleanor said. "I sent a message before we left town, requesting he meet us here rather than in Copper Creek." Daniel's composure slipped further. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Eleanor's confidence was unshakable. "Surrender now, Daniel. The judge is an old friend. I'm sure he'll be interested in hearing about a Treasury agent attempting to sabotage a U.S. mail route." Rage and calculation warred in Daniel's expression. Finally, he lowered his weapon. "This isn't over." "Actually," Jackson said, "I believe it is." Judge Wilson's arrival with 2 federal marshals confirmed Eleanor's claim. The elderly jurist took in the scene with shrewd eyes, the disabled explosives, the injured gunman, Daniel's disheveled appearance. "Mrs. Blackwood," the judge greeted Eleanor, Your message mentioned attempted sabotage of a mail route. I see you weren't exaggerating. Eleanor made the introductions, carefully presenting Jackson as her husband without elaborating on his background. The judge, whether from politeness or discretion, asked no probing questions about the recent marriage. Agent Hargrove, Wilson addressed Daniel formally, I believe you've exceeded your authority. Tampering with a federal mail route is a serious offense. This is a misunderstanding, Daniel attempted. I was investigating potential contract violations by the Blackwood Company. By planting explosives. The judge's eyebrows rose. An unusual investigative technique. As the marshals took custody of Daniel and rounded up his remaining men, Eleanor pulled Jackson aside. We should return to town immediately, she said quietly. Daniel will attempt to expose your identity as a final act of vengeance. I know, Jackson replied, watching as Daniel was led away in handcuffs, his eyes fixed on them with cold hatred. But I think it's time I stopped running. Back in Copper Creek, news of the confrontation at High Pass spread quickly. Eleanor's arm was properly bandaged by the town doctor, and Judge Wilson established a temporary court in the hotel dining room to hear Daniel's case. Despite Daniel's position with the Treasury Department, the evidence against him was damning. The testimony of his own hired men, the disabled explosives, and most significantly, documents found in his hotel room detailing the scheme with Thomas Caldwell. Sheriff Dodson, seeing which way the wind was blowing, suddenly remembered urgent business in the next county. Thomas Caldwell made himself scarce as well, fleeing town before he could be implicated further. That evening, as Eleanor and Jackson sat in her office reviewing the day's events, a knock came at the door. Judge Wilson entered, his expression grave. Mrs. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, or should I say, Mr. Miller. Jackson tensed but didn't deny it. Eleanor's hand found his arm, a silent gesture of support. I thought as much, the judge continued, seating himself without invitation. Agent, Hargrove was quite vocal about your true identity once he realized his situation. Whatever Jackson did in the past, Eleanor began. Wilson held up a hand. I'm here unofficially, Eleanor. We've known each other too long for me to ignore this matter, but I haven't come to make an arrest. Jackson studied the judge's weathered face. What have you come for, then? Information, Wilson replied simply, and perhaps to offer a proposition. He produced a worn, wanted poster from his coat, Jackson's likeness from years earlier, the reward amount substantial. 8 years ago, a ranch owner named Virgil Tate was shot during an altercation with a hand he'd recently dismissed. Witnesses claimed self-defense, but Tate's family had influence. The hand fled rather than face a hanging. Jackson's throat was dry. That's more or less how it happened. Wilson nodded. I suspected as much. Virgil Tate had a reputation for mistreating his workers, particularly those who'd served in the war. His son Preston was no better. What's your proposition, Judge? Eleanor asked. Hargrove will be transported to Denver tomorrow to face federal charges. He's desperate, making all manner of accusations about both of you. Wilson's gaze shifted. Between them, I could ensure those accusations receive proper scrutiny, meaning lengthy investigations during which certain individuals might find their pasts examined with uncomfortable thoroughness. Jackson understood. Or I could lose this poster, Wilson said, tossing it into the fire, and forget I ever heard the name Jackson Miller. In exchange, you both might consider a request from an old man who spent 40 years watching justice bend to accommodate wealth and influence. Eleanor smiled slightly. Name your price, Samuel. Not money, Wilson clarified. Service. The territories are growing, communities forming beyond the reach of formal law. What they need are people who understand both sides. Of justice, the letter and the spirit. Jackson frowned. You want me to become some kind of lawman? I want you both to consider establishing a branch of your Stagecoach line in Dakota Territory. The region needs reliable transportation, mail service, and people with flexible problem-solving skills. Wilson's eyes twinkled slightly. A U.S. marshal in that region could use reliable informants, people who understand how the less lawful elements operate. Eleanor and Jackson exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. We'd need guarantees, Eleanor said. Official ones. A pardon would be possible, with the right testimonials about reformed character and public service, Wilson replied. I still have some influence in the territorial government. And Daniel, Jackson asked, he won't stop seeking revenge. Agent Hargrove's career is finished. The Treasury Department is extremely sensitive about corruption in its ranks, particularly when it involves their anti-counterfeiting operations. He'll be fortunate to avoid prison. After Wilson departed, Eleanor poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Dakota Territory, she mused. It's undeveloped, challenging. Dangerous, Jackson added. Less dangerous than remaining here with the remnants of Daniel's allies sniffing around. She sipped her drink thoughtfully. Besides, expansion was always part of my plan for the company. Jackson studied her with new appreciation. At 68, when most would be considering retirement, Eleanor Blackwood was contemplating a new frontier. Her resilience was remarkable. A fresh start, he said. Again, Eleanor smiled. I've had several in my lifetime. They get more interesting each time. Will our arrangement continue? Jackson asked carefully. Unless you wish to dissolve it. Her gaze was direct. The judge's pardon would give you freedom to go your own way. Jackson considered this. Their marriage had begun as a pragmatic solution to mutual problems, protection for her, legitimacy for him. Yet somewhere amid the danger and revelations of the past weeks, something had shifted. Not romance, exactly, but a deeper partnership, built on shared survival, mutual respect, and a growing trust that neither had expected. I think, he said slowly, that Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota would benefit from having both founders present. Eleanor's smile deepened. I concur, Mr. Blackwood. They raised their glasses in silent toast, to new beginnings, to unexpected partnerships, and to the winding trails that had brought them to this moment. Outside, the sun set over Copper Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, colors of warning, but also of possibility. 6 months passed since the confrontation at High Pass. Spring came to Dakota Territory, melting the brutal winter snows and breathing new life into the frontier landscape. The small settlement of Silver Forks, little more than a crossroads 2 years earlier, had grown steadily with the establishment of the Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota headquarters. Jackson stood on the newly constructed depot's porch, surveying their accomplishments. 3 regular routes now connected Silver Forks to larger settlements, carrying mail, passengers, and freight through previously isolated territory. Their reputation for reliability had spread quickly, bringing both business opportunities and the challenges that came with success in a largely lawless region. "Rider coming!" called Lewis Porter, a young man who'd joined their operation as a stable hand and proven himself indispensable during the harsh winter months. Jackson shaded his eyes against the morning sun. The approaching rider pushed his mount. Hard, a sign of urgency that put Jackson on alert. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip, a habit he hadn't abandoned despite his supposedly reformed status. The rider reined in before the depot, his horse lathered with sweat. "Message for Mrs. Blackwood," he announced, holding out a sealed envelope. "From Judge Wilson, said it was urgent." Jackson accepted the envelope, tipped the rider, and directed him to the stables where his horse could be tended to. He found Eleanor In her office, bent over route maps and scheduling ledgers. From the judge, he said, handing her the envelope. Eleanor opened it with a letter opener, her expression growing serious as she read. Daniel Hargrove escaped during transport to Federal. Prison 3 weeks ago, she announced without preamble. The judge believes he may be heading this way. Jackson absorbed this news grimly. 3 weeks is plenty of time to reach Dakota Territory. Samuel has arranged additional marshals for the region, but he warns us to be vigilant. She placed the letter on her desk. Daniel knows both of us too well to attempt a direct confrontation. He'll look for leverage, Jackson agreed. Weak points in our operation, which is why we've been careful to avoid creating any. Eleanor's tone was confident, but Jackson detected the underlying tension. Daniel Hargrove represented the one threat they had hoped was permanently neutralized. Their move to Dakota Territory had proceeded more smoothly than either had anticipated. Judge Wilson had been true to his word, arranging a conditional pardon for Jackson, contingent upon his service as an unofficial informant to the U.S. Marshal's office. Eleanor had sold the original Blackwood Stagecoach line to a consortium of investors from Denver, using the capital to establish their new operation far from Daniel's sphere of influence. Their marriage, originally one of convenience, had evolved into a genuine partnership. Though not romantic in the conventional sense, they had developed a deep mutual respect and affection. Eleanor's business acumen complemented Jackson's practical frontier skills, creating an enterprise that had quickly become essential to the territory's development. We should warn the station managers, Jackson said, already thinking ahead. Hargrove might target the outlying stations first. Eleanor nodded in agreement. I'll prepare messages for each route. In the meantime, She was interrupted by a commotion outside. Jackson moved to the window to see a U.S. Marshal's wagon pulling up, flanked by 2 riders. The lead marshal, a stern-faced man named Nathaniel Reed, dismounted and approached the depot. Trouble, Jackson murmured, recognizing the official's purposeful stride. Eleanor straightened her papers calmly. Let me handle this. Marshal Reed entered without knocking, his manner brusque but not hostile. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Blackwood, he acknowledged them both with a nod. I need to speak with you regarding a sensitive matter. Of course, Marshal. Eleanor replied smoothly. Please, have a seat. Reed remained standing. I've received information about a potential threat to your operation. A former Treasury agent named Daniel Hargrove has escaped custody. My sources indicate he may be targeting your business. Jackson exchanged a glance with Eleanor. We just received similar news from Judge Wilson. Then you understand the seriousness of the situation, Reed continued. Hargrove has apparently been making inquiries about your routes, particularly the northern line to Fort Miller. Eleanor's expression remained composed, but Jackson noted the slight tensing of her shoulders. The northern route was their most profitable and most vulnerable, traversing sparse territory with few settlements along the way. We appreciate the warning, Eleanor said. We can adjust our schedules, perhaps add additional security. There's more, Reed interrupted. We have reason to believe Hargrove isn't working alone. He's been seen in the company of Thomas Caldwell. This was unexpected. Thomas Caldwell had disappeared after the High Pass incident, presumably fleeing potential charges. That he would risk aligning himself with a fugitive federal agent suggested a vendetta that transcended rational self-interest. There's also the matter of this, Reed continued, producing a wanted poster from his coat. Jackson tensed, but the image on the paper wasn't his own. Instead, it showed an artist's rendering of a woman, younger but unmistakably Eleanor. Elizabeth Porter, Reed read from the poster, wanted for forgery and counterfeiting activities. During the war between the states, presumed to have fled west under an assumed identity. Eleanor didn't flinch. An old matter, Marshal. Judge Wilson is fully aware of my history. Reed's expression remained neutral. "So I've been informed. The judge suggested that your expertise might prove useful in our current situation." "How so?" Jackson asked, watching the marshal carefully. "We've intercepted communications indicating that Hargrove and Caldwell aren't merely seeking revenge. They're establishing a counterfeiting operation somewhere in the territory, using techniques that bear remarkable similarity to those employed by Elizabeth Porter." Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "Daniel always lacked originality. He's recreating our wartime operation. With one significant difference," Reed added. "He's not working for any government this time, just himself." Reed spread a map across Eleanor's desk. "We've narrowed the possible locations to this region," he said, indicating a remote area near the Canadian border. "Isolated, difficult terrain, but accessible via the old Trappers Trail that runs parallel to your northern route." Jackson studied the map. "That's why he's been asking about our Fort Miller line. It's the closest established route to this area." "Precisely," Reed confirmed. "We need to locate their operation before they can distribute any counterfeit currency. Once it enters circulation, the damage to the territorial economy could be severe. And you want my help in identifying their setup," Eleanor concluded, "because I would recognize the equipment, the techniques." Reed nodded. "Judge Wilson speaks highly of your reformed character, Mrs. Blackwood. This is an opportunity to provide a valuable service to the territory." "While putting herself at risk," Jackson interjected. "Hargrove wants Eleanor dead, Marshal." "Which is why we're not suggesting Mrs. Blackwood venture into the field," Reed clarified. "We need information, expertise, perhaps guidance for our agents. Nothing more." Eleanor considered this proposal silently, her fingers tracing the borders of the map. Jackson knew she was weighing not just the risk to herself, but the potential impact on the business they'd built together and the community that now depended on them. "I'll help," she finally decided. "On one condition. My husband participates in the field operation." Reed frowned. "Mr. Blackwood isn't a federal agent." "No," Eleanor agreed, "but he knows Hargrove, understands how he thinks, and has proven himself capable in dangerous situations. More importantly, I trust him." The marshal deliberated briefly. "Very well. We depart tomorrow at first light. I'll have my men prepare the necessary equipment." After Reed departed, Jackson turned to Eleanor. "You didn't have to volunteer with me, didn't I?" Her eyebrow rose challengingly. "Would you have stayed behind while federal agents hunted Hargrove without your assistance?" Jackson smiled despite himself. "You know me too well." "A consequence of our arrangement," Eleanor replied with her own slight smile. "Now, help me gather everything I know about Daniel's methods. If he's replicating our wartime operation, there are specific vulnerabilities the marshals can exploit." Through the evening and into the night, Eleanor shared knowledge she'd kept buried for decades, the precise techniques for creating plates that would pass Treasury inspection, the specific paper compositions they'd developed, the chemical treatments for aging and authenticity. Jackson listened and took notes, asking occasional questions but mostly absorbing the remarkable level of expertise Eleanor had cultivated in her previous life. "You could have been wealthy beyond imagination with these skills," he observed as midnight approached. Eleanor's expression grew distant. "I was never motivated by wealth itself, only the freedom it provides, the ability to build something lasting, something legitimate." "Like Blackwood's Stagecoach." "Yes." Her gaze met his. "Though I never anticipated having a genuine partner in that endeavor, the moments stretched between them, filled with unspoken acknowledgement of how far they'd come from their initial arrangement." Jackson finally broke the silence. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." Dawn found Jackson preparing to depart with Marshal Reed and his team of 6 experienced agents. Eleanor had provided detailed information about what to look for, the specific equipment Daniel would need, the likely layout of the operation, the security measures he typically employed. "Remember," she told Jackson as he prepared to mount his horse, "Daniel is methodical to the point of predictability. He'll have established escape routes, fallback positions, and he'll have the counterfeiting equipment rigged for rapid destruction. If discovered." Jackson nodded, checking his weapons one final time. "I'll be back within the week." Eleanor's hand rested briefly on his arm, a touch that conveyed concern without explicitly stating it. "See that you are, Mr. Blackwood. We have a payroll meeting next Friday." He covered her hand with his own momentarily. "Yes, ma'am." The marshal's party traveled north at a punishing pace, following the established Blackwood route toward Fort Miller before veering northwest along the more primitive Trapper's Trail. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, dense forests giving way to rocky formations and hidden valleys that provided perfect concealment for illicit operations. On the third day, they discovered the first sign of Hargrove's presence: an abandoned campsite with traces of specialized chemicals used in currency production. Jackson recognized the distinctive smell from Eleanor's descriptions. "They were here recently," Reed observed, examining the still warm ashes of the campfire. "Within the last day." "Not their main operation," Jackson said, surveying the site. "Too exposed. This was probably a scouting party." They proceeded with heightened caution, sending scouts ahead and maintaining strict silence as they traveled. Late that afternoon, one of the scouts returned with news. A cabin tucked into a remote valley showed signs of recent construction and unusual activity. Under cover of approaching darkness, Reed's team established observation positions surrounding the valley. Through field glasses, Jackson studied the cabin and its surroundings. Smoke rose from the chimney despite the mild spring weather, consistent with the operation of a printing press, which required heated metal for optimal results. 2 men patrolled the perimeter with rifles, while a third tended to horses in a small corral. "That's Caldwell," Jackson whispered, recognizing the portly figure by the corral. "If he's here, Hargrove can't be far." Reed devised a plan for a pre-dawn raid, dividing his men into 3 teams to approach from different directions. Jackson was assigned to Reed's team, tasked with securing the main building, while the others neutralized the guards and prevented escape. The hours of darkness passed slowly. Jackson found himself thinking of Eleanor, not just her guidance for this mission, but the remarkable journey that had brought them together. From a desperate marriage of convenience to genuine partners facing a common enemy, their path had been anything but conventional. As the eastern sky began to lighten imperceptibly, Reed gave the signal to move. Jackson followed the marshal and 2 other agents as they silently approached the cabin from the rear. The other teams moved simultaneously toward their objectives. The operation began perfectly. The patrolling guards were subdued without alerting those inside, and Reed's team reached the cabin's back door undetected. Then everything went wrong. A hidden alarm, a thin wire at ankle height, triggered a bell inside the cabin. Shouts of alarm erupted, followed by the sound of breaking glass and a sudden burst of acrid smoke from the windows. "They're destroying evidence," Jackson called. "We need to get inside now." Reed kicked in the door, gun drawn, with Jackson and the others close behind. Through the thickening smoke, they could make out figures rushing about, feeding documents into a small stove that blazed hot enough to warp the metal. "Federal marshals!" Reed shouted. "Surrender immediately!" Gunfire erupted from the far side of the room. One of Reed's men fell with a cry of pain. Jackson ducked behind an overturned table, returning fire, while trying to locate Hargrove among the shadowy figures. The smoke was making it difficult to breathe, let alone see. Jackson pulled a bandana over his nose and mouth, then moved deeper into the cabin, staying low. He spotted the printing press, a specialized piece of equipment exactly as Eleanor had described, and beside it, a familiar figure frantically gathering plates and papers. "It's over, Daniel," Jackson called. Hargrove whirled, revolver in hand. "Miller!" he snarled, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Still hiding behind Eleanor's skirts?" "Surrendering is your only option," Jackson replied, keeping his own weapon. "Trained on the former Treasury agent. The building is surrounded." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "There are always options for men like us." He fired suddenly, the bullet splintering wood inches from Jackson's head. Jackson returned fire, hitting Daniel in the shoulder. The man staggered but remained standing, his expression contorted with rage and pain. "We're nothing alike," Jackson said, advancing carefully. "I chose to build something legitimate. You're still clinging to your old schemes." "Legitimate?" Daniel spat the word. "You're a murderer playing at respectability, and Eleanor is a criminal who abandoned her true calling. To play frontier businesswoman, neither of you can escape what you really are." Before Jackson could respond, the roof timbers groaned ominously. The fire had spread faster than anyone anticipated, weakening the structure. Marshal Reed appeared through the smoke. "We need to evacuate," he shouted. "The whole place is going up." Jackson kept his gun trained on Daniel. "Move slowly." As they edged toward the door, Daniel suddenly lunged toward a desk, grabbing something Jackson couldn't see. Reed fired, hitting Daniel in the leg. The former Treasury agent collapsed against the desk, which tipped over, revealing a hidden compartment containing stacks of nearly completed counterfeit bills. "My life's work," Daniel gasped, clutching the wound in his leg. "She was supposed to be part of this. We were meant to rule together." Another timber crashed nearby, sending sparks and burning, debris cascading around them. "He can't walk," Jackson told Reed. "I'll carry him." Despite Daniel's struggles and protests, Jackson hoisted the wounded man over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and fought his way through the intensifying smoke toward the exit. Reed led the way, helping his injured agent. They burst out of the burning cabin just as the roof began to collapse entirely. The fresh air was a shock to their smoke-filled lungs. Jackson deposited Daniel roughly on the ground as the remaining marshals secured Thomas Caldwell and the other captured counterfeiters. Daniel looked up at Jackson, blood seeping through his clothing from multiple wounds. "Why save me?" he asked, with genuine confusion in his voice. "You could have let me burn." Jackson considered the question seriously. "Because that's the difference between us, Hargrove. I'm not who I was 8 years ago. People can change." "Eleanor hasn't," Daniel insisted, though his voice was weakening. "Deep down, she's still Elizabeth Porter, the greatest forger who ever lived. My partner, Your equal," Jackson interrupted. "That's what you could never accept. She was always your equal, never your possession." As the marshals tended to the wounded and secured the prisoners for transport, Jackson surveyed the burning remains of the counterfeiting operation. Hargrove had recreated his wartime setup with impressive accuracy, but had overlooked one crucial factor. The people who had once made it successful had evolved, changed, and moved forward with their lives. The return journey to Silver Forks took 4 days, slowed by the wounded and the prisoners. Jackson rode ahead on the final day, eager to bring news of their success to Eleanor. He found her waiting on the depot porch, her composure not quite hiding her relief at his return. "It's done," he told her simply. "Hargrove's operation is destroyed. He and Caldwell are in custody, along with 3 others. Eleanor nodded, absorbing the information. "And Daniel?" "Wounded, but he'll survive to stand trial." Jackson dismounted, stretching muscles sore from days in the saddle. "He mentioned you, said you were supposed to be part of his operation." "In his mind, perhaps," Eleanor replied. "Daniel never understood why I left our partnership. He saw only the profit we forfeited, not the cost to our humanity." They walked together into the depot, where the day's business continued regardless of personal victories or past demons laid to rest. A driver was preparing the afternoon stage for its southbound journey. Passengers gathered with their luggage, and Lewis Porter called out questions about schedule changes. "Marshal Reed will want your testimony eventually," Jackson mentioned, as they entered Eleanor's office. "But he's agreed it can wait until the prisoners are secure in federal custody." Eleanor set about making coffee on the small stove in the corner, a ritual that had become familiar in their shared mornings. "And your pardon?" "Reed says Judge Wilson will make it permanent in light of my invaluable assistance to federal authorities." Jackson smiled slightly. "It seems I'm officially reformed." "Reformed?" Eleanor echoed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "What an interesting concept. Do you feel reformed, Mr. Blackwood?" Jackson considered this as he accepted the cup she offered. "I feel settled. For the first time in a very long time." "Settled," she repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I believe that's an accurate description." They stood together by the window, watching the activity of the growing settlement they had helped establish. The afternoon stage departed in a cloud of dust, carrying mail, passengers and parcels to communities that had once been isolated. Businesses had sprung up around the depot: a hotel, a general store, a saloon that maintained reasonable order, thanks to the presence of the Stagecoach line's employees. "What happens now?" Jackson asked finally. Eleanor's gaze remained on the horizon, where the stage was disappearing into the distance. "Now, we continue building what we've started. The territorial governor has proposed subsidizing a new eastern route. The mining companies up north are requesting dedicated freight service." "I meant with us," Jackson clarified quietly. Eleanor turned to him then, her blue eyes direct as always. "Our arrangement has served its purpose, Jackson. Your pardon will soon be official. My past is finally truly behind me. If you wish to dissolve our partnership—" "I don't," he interrupted, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Unless that's what you want." A moment of silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with consideration. "What I want," Eleanor said finally, "is to continue building this company with someone I trust. Someone who sees me as I am now, not as who I was." Jackson nodded slowly. "That happens to align with my own wishes." Her smile then was genuine, the kind she rarely showed to others. "Then I believe we have an agreement, Mr. Blackwood." "Indeed we do, Mrs. Blackwood." Outside, Silver Forks continued to grow around the enterprise they had built together. Two people with complicated pasts who had found, in the most unlikely circumstances, a future neither had dared imagine. Not a conventional love story, perhaps, but a partnership forged through survival, respect, and the shared experience of reinvention. 5 years passed, transforming both Silver Forks and the Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota into established fixtures of the territory. What had begun as a single depot with 3 routes had expanded into a network spanning 4 states, with 14 stations and over 50 employees. The small settlement had grown into a proper town, complete with a school, a bank, and even a small theater that hosted traveling shows when they ventured this far into the frontier. On a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor Blackwood sat at her desk, reviewing the quarterly accounts. At 73, she remained sharp-minded and formidable, though she had gradually delegated more day-to-day operations to trusted employees. Her silver hair was now pure white, and the lines on her face had deepened, but her blue eyes retained their piercing intelligence. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called. Louis Porter entered, having risen from stable hand to operations manager over the years. "Telegraph from Fort Miller, Mrs. Blackwood. The bridge repair is complete. Regular service can resume tomorrow." "Excellent," Eleanor replied. "Inform Mr. Evans to prepare the coaches. We'll need to clear the backlog of mail and freight before the week's end." As Porter departed, Eleanor gazed out the window at the bustling activity of the depot yard. Jackson was there, inspecting a new coach that had arrived from the manufacturer in St. Louis. At 37, he had grown into his role as co-owner with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. The years had added a few streaks, of grey to his temples and lines at the corners of his eyes, but had also given him something he'd never possessed during his outlaw days, a sense of belonging. Their partnership had flourished beyond anything either could have anticipated when they entered their arrangement of convenience. Though their marriage remained unconventional by most standards, each maintaining separate quarters within their large house at the edge of town, they had developed a deep bond built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and genuine affection. Eleanor was gathering her papers when another knock came, this one more hesitant. "Yes?" she called. The door opened to reveal Sarah Whitaker, the young telegrapher who had taken over when old Mr. Collins retired the previous year. "Excuse me, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, her expression troubled. "A priority wire just came through from Judge Wilson in Denver." Eleanor accepted the telegram, thanking Sarah before unfolding the paper. As she read the terse message, her carefully maintained composure faltered slightly. Daniel Hargrove died federal prison. Stop left sealed documents with warden. Stop contains information on a Blackwood and J. Miller. Stop documents released to Denver. Post reporter stop advise immediate preparations. Stop Wilson. Lena read the message twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in her desk drawer. She had known this day might come. Daniel Hargrove had been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for counterfeiting, attempted murder, and corruption. Though his power and influence had been stripped away, his knowledge and his capacity for vengeance had remained intact. She found Jackson still in the yard, discussing suspension improvements with the company's blacksmith. "A word, please," she said quietly, her tone conveying the urgency that her demeanor concealed from others. In the privacy of his office, a space much less formal than hers, with maps covering the walls and practical equipment occupying most surfaces, Eleanor handed him the telegram without comment. Jackson read it, his expression darkening. "After all this time," he murmured, "his final revenge." "Judge Wilson wouldn't have sent this if it weren't serious," Eleanor said. "Daniel must have documented everything. My past as Elizabeth Porter, your history as Jackson Miller, our original arrangement. He probably embellished considerably. The Denver Post," Jackson noted, "one of the largest papers in the West. Whatever story comes from this will spread quickly." Eleanor nodded grimly. "Our options are limited. We could deny everything of course, but Daniel would have ensured his evidence was compelling. We could leave," Jackson suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "Start over somewhere else." The idea hung between them briefly, before Eleanor shook her head. "I've started over 3 times in my life. I'm 73, Jackson. This is where I've chosen to make my final stand." Jackson studied her face, seeing the determination that had carried her through decades of adversity. "Then we face it together," he said simply. "But we should prepare the company for the fallout." "Agreed. Call a meeting of the senior staff. For this afternoon. We'll need to ensure operations continue regardless of what happens." As word of Daniel Hargrove's death and his posthumous revelations spread, Silver Forks buzzed with speculation. Though the actual newspaper hadn't yet reached their remote location, rumors traveled faster than stagecoaches. By evening, Eleanor and Jackson had briefed their management team on the potential scandal without revealing specific details. The reactions ranged from staunch loyalty to pragmatic concern about the business implications. 3 days later, the Denver Post arrived, containing the first installment of what was billed as The Blackwood Deception, a tale of forgery, murder, and frontier justice. The reporter, Ambrose Parker, had crafted a sensationalized account based on Daniel's documents, painting Eleanor as a master criminal who had manipulated the banking system during the Civil War, and Jackson as a cold-blooded killer who had married her for protection and wealth. "He's mixed truth with fabrication," Eleanor observed as they read the article together in their home. enough accuracy to make the lies believable. The timing is strategic, Jackson noted. The Territorial Banking Commission meets next month to award mail contracts for the next 5 years. Eleanor's smile was thin. Daniel always did understand leverage. Even from the grave, he's targeting our livelihood. The second installment arrived a week later, focusing on Eleanor's alleged counterfeiting activities during the war and hinting at treasonous collaboration with Confederate agents. A complete fabrication that nevertheless carried the sting of plausibility given her confirmed skills as a forger. The third piece detailed Jackson's supposed criminal exploits, greatly exaggerated beyond the self-defense killing that had forced him into life as a fugitive. According to Parker's account, Jackson Miller had been responsible for multiple robberies, assaults, and at least 3 cold-blooded murders before assuming the Blackwood name. By the time the fourth installment arrived, which revealed their marriage as a calculated business arrangement rather than a love match, Silver Forks had divided into factions. Some residents, particularly those whose livelihoods depended on the Stagecoach company, dismissed the stories as sensationalized nonsense. Others, including several prominent business owners who had long resented the Blackwoods' influence, called for investigations and severing of government contracts. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Sarah Whitaker, appeared at their office door, her expression anxious. "There's a Mr. Parker here to see you." The reporter from Denver. Eleanor and Jackson exchanged glances. "Show him in," Eleanor decided after a moment. Ambrose. Parker was younger than they had expected, perhaps 30, with the keen eyes of someone who had built a career on observing others' discomfort. He carried a leather portfolio and a confident smile that faltered slightly under Eleanor's direct gaze. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Blackwood." He greeted them, accepting the seat Eleanor indicated. "I appreciate your willingness to meet with me." "Curiosity, rather than willingness," Eleanor corrected. "I wanted to see the man who has built such an imaginative narrative around our lives." Parker's smile tightened. The documentation provided by Mr. Hargrove was quite thorough. "And conveniently one-sided," Jackson observed. "The perspective of a bitter man with a vendetta makes for dramatic reading but hardly balanced reporting." The reporter opened his portfolio. "I have copies of Treasury Department records, sworn statements from associates of Elizabeth Porter, and testimonials regarding Jackson Miller's activities in 3 territories. If you're disputing the factual basis—" "We're disputing the context and intent," Eleanor interrupted. Daniel Hargrove was a corrupt Treasury agent who attempted to sabotage a U.S. mail route, engaged in blackmail, and established an illegal counterfeiting operation. His documentation is revenge, pure and simple. Parker seemed momentarily taken, aback by her directness. "So you don't deny that you are Elizabeth Porter, or that Mr. Blackwood is actually Jackson Miller?" Eleanor leaned forward. "Mr. Parker, I am 73 years old. I have built a business that employs over 50 people and serves communities that would otherwise be isolated from the wider world. My husband has received a federal pardon for his past actions, and together we have contributed to the development of this territory for the past 5 years. Those are the relevant facts of our present situation. The public might disagree about what's relevant," Parker countered. "They have a right to know who controls the mail routes, who handles their money." "Indeed they do," Jackson said quietly. "Which is why Judge Samuel Wilson was fully informed of our backgrounds before facilitating our establishment in Dakota Territory. The Federal Marshal's Office has been aware of my identity and past since we arrived. Nothing about our operation has been hidden from the proper authorities." Parker looked between them, clearly not having anticipated this angle. "You're claiming government knowledge and approval of your colorful histories?" "We're stating it as fact," Eleanor replied. "Check with Judge Wilson if you doubt us, though I suspect you'd prefer not to include that detail in your sensational narrative." The reporter shifted uncomfortably. "My fifth installment is due to be published next week. It would be journalistically irresponsible not to include your perspective." "How considerate," Eleanor said dryly. "And what would this inclusion of our perspective entail?" "An interview," Parker said, producing a notebook and pencil. "Your opportunity to address the allegations directly." Jackson and Eleanor exchanged another glance, communicating silently in the way of people who had faced numerous crises together. "Very well," Eleanor decided, "but not a traditional interview. I propose an alternative that might better serve both our interests." 2 weeks later, the final installment of the Blackwood story appeared in the Denver Post. Instead of further sensationalized accusations, readers found a first-person account jointly written by Eleanor and Jackson Blackwood. The piece was forthright about their unconventional past without apology or excessive justification. "We neither deny nor apologize for our histories. The paths that led us to Dakota Territory were indeed unusual. Eleanor Blackwood did employ her considerable skills as a document specialist during the Civil War in service to the Union. Jackson Blackwood did flee unjust prosecution after defending himself against a violent employer. Our marriage did begin as a practical partnership rather than a romantic attachment. What Mr. Parker's previous accounts failed to convey was the context of these choices, the growth that followed them, and the legitimacy of the enterprise we subsequently built. The Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota represents not a criminal empire, but a second chance, for us and for the communities we serve. Judge Samuel Wilson of the Territorial Court has confirmed that all relevant authorities were informed of our backgrounds. When we established operations in Dakota Territory, our business practices have been transparent, our contracts fulfilled with unwavering reliability. To those who have supported us during these revelations, we offer our sincere gratitude. To those who may view us with newfound suspicion, we offer not excuses, but a simple invitation. Judge us by our present actions and contributions rather than by sensationalized accounts of a past that none of us can change. The article concluded with a statement from Judge Wilson confirming the legitimate nature of the Blackwood operation and Jackson's formal pardon, followed by testimonials from various community leaders throughout the territory attesting to the company's positive impact on frontier development. The public reaction was mixed, but increasingly favorable, as the more sensational aspects of Parker's earlier reporting were contextualized. The Banking Commission, after a brief inquiry, renewed all mail contracts with Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota, citing their unblemished record of service. A month after the final article, Eleanor and Jackson sat on the porch of their home overlooking Silver Forks as evening settled over the town. The controversy had largely subsided, though occasional whispers and sidelong glances suggested some memories would be slower to fade. "Daniel succeeded in one respect," Eleanor observed, watching. "The lamplighter moved down the main street. Our carefully constructed personas are gone forever. And yet the business continues," Jackson noted. "The routes run on schedule, the mail gets delivered. Because what we built was genuine, despite its unusual foundations." Eleanor's gaze shifted to the distant mountains, painted gold by the setting sun. "I've been thinking about Harold lately, my second husband. He used to say that frontiers aren't just places, they're opportunities for reinvention." Jackson considered this. 3 reinventions in one lifetime is impressive. 4, counting this most recent one. A small smile curved Eleanor's lips. From Eleanor Blackwood, respectable businesswoman, to Eleanor Blackwood, reformed forger, with an outlaw husband. Rather liberating in a way. No more secrets to protect. No more looking over our shoulders. Jackson agreed, though I suspect it will take some time for certain people in town to look me in the eye again. People have short memories when their interests align with yours, Eleanor said pragmatically. By spring, this will be old news, especially once the railroad survey is complete. The territorial legislature had recently approved funds for a preliminary survey for a railway line that would eventually connect their region to the Transcontinental Railroad. Such a development would transform transportation throughout the area and potentially render stagecoach lines obsolete. We should discuss our strategy for the coming changes, Jackson said, following her thoughts with the ease of long partnership. The railroad will reach Silver Forks within 3 years if the surveys are favorable. Adapt or perish, Eleanor mused. Perhaps Blackwood Stagecoach should consider becoming Blackwood Transport. Feeder lines to the railway stations, local deliveries, specialized freight that requires more careful handling than the railroad provides. Jackson smiled. Always thinking ahead. A habit that served me well for 73 years, she replied. Though I'm finding it increasingly pleasant to occasionally look back as well, to appreciate the path traveled. A comfortable silence fell between them as darkness gathered. Lights appeared in windows throughout the town, creating a constellation of human presence in the vast wilderness. What had begun as a desperate arrangement between two people seeking protection from their pasts had evolved into something neither could have anticipated. A partnership that had not only ensured their survival, but had helped tame a frontier. I received a letter from Judge Wilson today, Jackson said eventually. He's retiring to Denver at the end of the year. Suggested I might consider taking on some official role in territorial justice. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Marshal Blackwood? An interesting proposition. I haven't decided, Jackson admitted, though there's a certain symmetry to the idea. Full circle, Eleanor observed, from hunted to hunter. Though I suspect you'd bring a unique perspective to the role, compassion alongside justice. I learned that from you, Jackson said quietly, seeing how you built a legitimate life despite the obstacles, how you found a way forward without denying your past. Eleanor reached across the space between their chairs, briefly touching his hand, a rare gesture of physical affection that had become slightly more common between them in recent years. We've had quite an unconventional partnership, Mr. Blackwood. Indeed we have, Mrs. Blackwood, he replied, turning his hand to clasp hers momentarily. And I wouldn't change a moment of it. As night fell completely over Silver Forks, they remained. On the porch, two figures silhouetted against the warm light from within their home. Their beginning had been born of desperation, their journey marked by danger and revelation, but their present, and whatever future remained, was entirely their own creation. The penniless outlaw and the elderly stagecoach owner had long since disappeared, transformed through circumstance, choice, and time into something neither could have imagined that first desperate night in a depot in Wyoming territory. What remained was something far more valuable than the protection each had initially sought, a genuine partnership founded on mutual respect, shared resilience, and the hard-won wisdom that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most meaningful destinations. Winter settled over Silver Forks with a fierce intensity that even long-time residents found remarkable. By mid-December, snowdrifts piled against buildings, trails became impassable, and the Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota was forced to suspend several routes due to dangerous conditions. Only the southern line remained operational, providing a tenuous connection to the wider world. In their home at the edge of town, Eleanor spent her 74th birthday reviewing contingency plans for the company while Jackson coordinated with their station managers via telegraph. Outside, the wind howled, driving snow against the windows in swirling patterns that cast shifting shadows through the rooms. Latest wire from Fort Miller, Jackson announced, entering the study where Eleanor sat beside a crackling fire. They've lost their north wall to the storm. Thankfully, no injuries. Eleanor sighed, making a note in her ledger. That's the third station with significant damage. This winter will cost us dearly. The railway survey team has abandoned their work until spring, Jackson added, warming his hands by the fire. Their chief engineer is stranded at our Whitewater station. Despite the challenges posed by the brutal weather, there was an undercurrent of optimism in their planning. The controversy sparked by Daniel Hargrove's posthumous revelations had largely faded in the face of more immediate concerns. Communities throughout the territory had rallied around the services Blackwood provided, delivering medicine to isolated settlements, maintaining communication lines when telegraph wires fell, and ensuring vital supplies reached those in need. Judge Wilson's replacement arrives next week, Eleanor noted, changing the subject. Assuming the southern route remains passable, Jackson nodded. Judge Lawrence Thornton. I've heard he's fair-minded but strictly by the book. A necessary quality in a frontier judge. Eleanor closed her ledger. Have you given further thought to his offer? The new territorial judge had written to Jackson, reiterating Wilson's suggestion that he consider taking on an official role in territorial justice. The position outlined was unusual, a special marshal with authority to investigate complex cases that cross jurisdictional boundaries throughout the region. I have, Jackson admitted. Though I'm concerned about the impact on the company. My responsibilities here can be managed, Eleanor interjected. Lewis Porter is ready for greater responsibility, and Sarah has proven herself exceptionally capable with the scheduling and contracts. Jackson studied Eleanor's face, noting the slight changes that had emerged over the winter, a new softness in her expression that balanced her lifelong pragmatism. You believe I should accept? I believe, she replied carefully, that you possess a unique perspective valuable to territorial justice. You understand both sides of the law in ways few others can claim. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, appeared with an apologetic expression. Mr. Porter is here, ma'am. Says it's urgent. Lewis entered, snow melting from his coat and hat. His normally composed demeanor was visibly shaken. Southern route's been hit, he reported grimly. Avalanche took out a section of Crow's Pass. Coach number 8 was caught in it. Jackson was already reaching for his coat. Casualties? Unknown. The report came via a rider who witnessed it from the lower trail. He managed to reach the Granite Falls station, but couldn't get close to the slide. How many passengers? Eleanor asked, rising from her chair with a briskness that belied her age. 5, plus driver Mason and guard Calloway. Lewis's expression was grim. Judge Thornton was among the passengers. Within the hour, Jackson was leading a rescue party south despite the continuing storm. Eleanor, despite her desire to accompany them, remained in Silver Forks to coordinate support efforts, arranging for the doctor to prepare for potential injuries, organizing supplies, and ensuring the telegraph operator remained at his post. For updates, the rescue operation lasted 3 grueling days. Jackson's party battled relentless weather and treacherous conditions to reach the buried coach. Working with picks, shovels, and bare hands when necessary, they eventually uncovered the vehicle, which had been partially protected by an outcropping that had diverted the main force of the avalanche. Of the 7 people trapped, 5 had survived, including Mason the driver and Judge Thornton. Guard Calloway and an elderly passenger had succumbed to their injuries before help arrived. The survivors, suffering from cold and various injuries, were transported carefully back to Silver Forks, where Eleanor had prepared the company's meeting hall as a temporary infirmary. Judge Thornton, a robust man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard and penetrating grey eyes, recovered more quickly than expected. Within 2 days of his rescue, he requested a meeting with both Eleanor and Jackson. I find myself in the unusual position of owing my life to the very people I was sent to evaluate, Thornton remarked, as they gathered in the Blackwood home. Though still pale from his ordeal, his voice carried the practiced authority of a man accustomed to command. "The weather spares no one, Your Honor," Eleanor replied. "Evaluation or not." Thornton smiled slightly. "Direct as Samuel described you." He turned to Jackson. "Your rescue operation was impressively organized, Mr. Blackwood, or should I say, Mr. Miller?" Jackson met his gaze steadily. "Blackwood is my legal name now, Your Honor, confirmed by federal pardon and territorial documentation." "So I understand." Thornton sipped the tea Eleanor had provided. "I've reviewed Judge Wilson's complete files regarding both your situations. What the Denver Post published was substantially more sensational than the official record indicates. Newspapers rarely sell copies by understating matters," Eleanor observed dryly. "Indeed." Thornton set down his cup. "I also reviewed the operation reports for Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota. 5 years of continuous service, often under extreme conditions. Mail delivered, passengers transported safely, communities connected that would otherwise remain isolated. Quite a legacy, regardless of how it began." Eleanor and Jackson exchanged glances, but remained silent, waiting for the judge to reach his point. "The position we discussed in our correspondence, Mr. Blackwood," Thornton continued, "becomes even more relevant in light of recent events. This territory faces challenges beyond mere criminality, natural disasters, isolated communities, bureaucratic inefficiencies. What's needed is someone who understands both the letter and spirit of the law, who can navigate between official channels and practical realities." "You're still offering the position," Jackson said, somewhat surprised. "With greater conviction than before." Thornton leaned forward. "I've spent 3 days thinking of little besides my mortality, Mr. Blackwood. It clarifies one's priorities remarkably. This territory needs good people doing difficult work, regardless of their histories." After Thornton departed to rest at the doctor's insistence, Eleanor and Jackson remained at their kitchen table, contemplating the unexpected turn of events. "It seems your path is being chosen for you," Eleanor commented. "First Wilson, now Thornton." Jackson shook his head slightly. "No path is chosen for us, only presented as an option." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "And will you take this option?" "I believe I will," he replied after a moment, "with one condition." "Which is?" "That you consider your own next chapter." Jackson's expression was earnest. "You've built this company. From nothing, guided it through every challenge. Perhaps it's time to consider what you want beyond business concerns." Eleanor appeared momentarily taken aback. In all their years together, they had rarely discussed personal desires beyond the practical needs of their partnership. At 74, one's options narrow considerably. "I disagree," Jackson said quietly. "You've reinvented yourself repeatedly throughout your life. Why stop now?" The question lingered between them as the winter storm continued its assault outside. Eleanor finally smiled, a genuine expression rarely witnessed by anyone besides. "Jackson, perhaps," she said thoughtfully, "it's time I documented my experiences, not for publication, but as a record of a life lived beyond conventional boundaries." "Memoirs?" Jackson seemed intrigued by the idea. "More of a private history," Eleanor clarified. "The true account of Elizabeth Porter, Eleanor Blackwood, and the various lives between. Something to leave behind when I'm gone." Jackson nodded slowly. "A worthy project, though I hope its completion lies many years in the future." Spring eventually came to Silver Forks, the brutal winter giving way to spectacular renewal. Wildflowers carpeted meadows where snowdrifts had stood, and the community emerged from isolation with fresh energy. Blackwood Stagecoach Dakota resumed. All routes, repairing winter damage and expanding services to meet growing demand. Jackson accepted Judge Thornton's offer, becoming a special territorial marshal with unique authority to address complex cases throughout the region. His first official action was to establish a network of deputy volunteers stationed at Blackwood depots throughout the territory, creating an informal but effective communication system that significantly improved response times to emergencies. Eleanor, true to her word, began documenting her remarkable life story while gradually transitioning daily operations to their most trusted employees. She retained final authority on major decisions, but found unexpected satisfaction in mentoring the next generation of company leadership. Their partnership, which had begun as a desperate arrangement between two people seeking protection, had evolved into something neither could have predicted. A foundation upon which not just their own security, but the development of an entire region had been built. "We've come a long way from that night in Wyoming territory," Eleanor observed one evening, as they sat reviewing the company's expansion plans. "From a wounded outlaw and a stagecoach owner with secrets," Jackson agreed, "to whatever we are now." Eleanor considered this. "Partners," she said simply. "In the truest sense of the word." Jackson smiled. "I believe that description suits us perfectly, Mrs. Blackwood." "Indeed it does, Mr. Blackwood," she replied. "Indeed it does." Autumn painted the Dakota Territory in brilliant hues of gold and crimson as the 10th anniversary of Blackwood's Stagecoach Dakota approached. Silver Forks had transformed dramatically during the decade since Eleanor and Jackson had established their operation. The once modest settlement now boasted a population nearing 2,000, with brick buildings replacing many of the original wooden structures along Main Street. The promised railway had indeed arrived 2 years earlier, bringing increased commerce, new residents, and profound changes to transportation throughout the region. Eleanor Blackwood, now 77, sat at her desk in the company headquarters, a stately 2-story brick building that had replaced the original depot. Though she had officially retired from daily operations 3 years earlier, she still maintained an office where she advised on strategic matters and continued work on her private memoirs. "The Denver packet arrived," Mrs. Blackwood announced. Margaret Foster, her personal assistant, a sharp-minded young woman who had originally joined the company as a bookkeeper. "Thank you, Margaret." Eleanor accepted the bundle of correspondence, noting a letter bearing the territorial governor's seal. She opened it first, her expression remaining neutral as she read its contents. The letter confirmed rumors that had circulated for months. Governor Harrison was nominating Jackson Blackwood for the position of Territorial Commissioner of Transportation, overseeing the integration of stagecoach lines, railways, and the emerging telegraph networks throughout the region. It was a significant appointment that recognized both his work as special marshal and his expertise in frontier transportation logistics. Eleanor placed the letter aside, making a mental note to discuss it with Jackson that evening. The nomination was hardly surprising. His reputation had grown steadily over the years as he navigated his unique position between law enforcement and transportation development. What had begun as an unusual appointment by Judge Thornton had evolved into a vital role as the territory expanded and modernized. Her attention turned to the leather-bound journal on her desk, the 12th volume of her memoirs. The pages contained her meticulous account of a life lived across multiple identities and eras of American history. Beginning with her childhood in Baltimore, continuing through her years as master forger Elizabeth Porter during the Civil War, and documenting her transformation into businesswoman Eleanor Blackwood, the journals represented her most private legacy. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Lewis Porter entered, now the company's general manager and effectively running daily operations. At 40, he had grown from the eager, stable hand into a confident executive whose loyalty to the Blackwoods was matched only by his business acumen. "Mrs. Blackwood, the board meeting is set to begin," he reminded her. "They're waiting in the conference room." Though Eleanor had relinquished operational control, She remained chairwoman of the board that governed Blackwood Transportation, the expanded enterprise that had evolved from their original Stagecoach line. The company now managed a complex network of stagecoach routes that connected to railway stations, operated freight transfer facilities at key junctions, and had recently ventured into the promising field of telegraph message delivery. The board meeting proceeded efficiently, with reports indicating continued growth despite the challenges posed by railway expansion. Eleanor listened more than she spoke, offering guidance only on the most significant strategic questions. When the meeting concluded, she remained behind as the others filed out, taking a moment to appreciate what their enterprise had become. From her window, she could see the business district of Silver Forks stretching toward the railway station at the edge of town. Twice daily trains now connected the community to Denver and points east, while Blackwood stagecoaches carried passengers and mail to the more remote settlements still beyond the reach of steel rails. Later that evening, Eleanor and Jackson dined together in their home, a tradition they maintained despite their increasingly independent daily routines. Though their marriage had never conformed to conventional expectations, it had evolved into a deeply rooted partnership built on mutual respect and shared history. The governor's letter arrived today, Eleanor mentioned, as they enjoyed the excellent beef stew prepared by their cook, Mrs. Henderson. Jackson nodded. Judge Thornton mentioned the nomination was forthcoming. I haven't decided whether to accept. At 42, Jackson Blackwood had matured into a man of significant influence in the territory. His unique background gave him credibility with frontier settlers and government officials alike, while the pardon secured years earlier had long since ceased to be a matter of public interest. The silver at his temples and the quiet authority in his manner reflected the journey from desperate outlaw to respected public figure. It's a considerable responsibility, Eleanor observed. Overseeing the transition from stagecoach to railway would effectively mean dismantling much of what we've built. Not dismantling, Jackson corrected gently. Evolving, as we've already begun to do with the freight transfer stations and telegraph services. Eleanor smiled slightly. Spoken like a true commissioner already. They fell into a comfortable silence as they considered the changes that had shaped their lives. The parlor where they sat had witnessed countless strategic discussions, difficult decisions, and quiet celebrations over the years. Though they maintained separate bedrooms according to their original arrangement, this shared space had become the heart of their unconventional partnership. I've been thinking, Jackson said finally, about our journey from that night in Wyoming territory. How neither of us could have imagined where that desperate arrangement would lead. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Life rarely follows predictable paths. My entire existence is testament to that truth. Your memoirs, Jackson said. How far have you progressed? I've reached 1882, the counterfeiting operation with Daniel Hargrove. Another volume or two should complete the account. Eleanor paused, considering her next words carefully. I've been contemplating what becomes of them after I'm gone. Jackson met her gaze steadily. Have you reached a decision? Not yet, she admitted. Part of me believes they should remain private, perhaps destroyed. Another part feels there's value in preserving the truth, however complicated. The truth has many facets, Jackson observed. Your journals contain only one perspective on events that shaped not just our lives, but this entire region. Eleanor considered this. Perhaps that's why I hesitate. A partial truth can be more misleading than a complete fabrication. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock at the front door. Mrs. Henderson admitted Marshal Clyde Bennett, who apologized for the late intrusion. There's been a situation at the Northern Depot, Bennett reported. A group of armed men attempted to rob the evening shipment from the Fort Miller goldfields. They've taken hostages. Jackson was immediately alert. Casualties. 2 guards wounded, not critically. The station manager and 3 passengers are being held inside. Eleanor was already moving toward her office. I'll have the company telegraph. Operator, send alerts to all stations. How many men? 5 that we know of, Bennett replied. Former railway workers, according to a witness who escaped. They were laid off when the new line changed its planned route last month. Jackson gathered his coat and marshal's badge. I'll take 6 men and approach from the East Ridge. Have your deputies secure the southern approach but maintain distance. No direct engagement until we assess the situation. Though no longer officially a lawman since accepting the advisory position to Judge Thornton 2 years earlier, Jackson's expertise in crisis situations was still regularly called upon. The unique network of information and resources he had established throughout the territory made him invaluable in complex emergencies. Eleanor touched his arm briefly, a silent exchange that communicated both concern and confidence. Take Porter with you. He knows the Northern Depot's layout better than anyone. Within the hour, Jackson and a carefully selected team were riding north through the darkness. The gold shipment under threat was significant, part of a bi-weekly transport that Blackwood had contracted to manage between the mining operations and the railway junction 30 miles south of Silver Forks. Eleanor remained at the company telegraph office, coordinating information and resources as reports came in from various stations. Despite her age, she demonstrated the same sharp focus and decisive leadership that had characterized her management style throughout her career. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, a telegraph arrived from the Northern Depot. The situation had been resolved without further bloodshed. Jackson's strategic approach had enabled them to free the hostages and apprehend the would-be robbers before violence escalated. By mid-morning, Eleanor received word that Jackson was returning to Silver Forks with the prisoners. She allowed herself a moment of relief before turning her attention to the press inquiries already arriving at the office. The attempted robbery would make headlines throughout the territory, highlighting both the value of the gold shipments Blackwood transported and the efficiency with which the company handled security threats. Jackson arrived that afternoon, tired but satisfied with the operation's outcome. They were desperate men, he reported as they conferred in Eleanor's office, former railway workers with families to feed and limited options. That doesn't excuse taking hostages, Eleanor noted, though her tone held understanding rather than judgment. No, Jackson agreed, but it contextualizes their actions. I've spoken with Gregory Hayes at the mining company. He's willing to consider hiring the men for security positions after they serve reasonable sentences. Eleanor smiled slightly, still finding middle paths between justice and compassion. A lesson I learned from you, Jackson replied. Seeing beyond immediate circumstances to underlying motivations. The following week brought notable changes to Silver Forks. The attempted robbery had accelerated discussions about establishing a proper territorial bank in the growing community. Meanwhile, Governor Harrison arrived personally to discuss the commissioner position with Jackson, emphasizing the strategic importance of coordinated transportation development as the territory moved toward potential statehood. Eleanor hosted the governor for dinner, observing with quiet pride as Jackson articulated his vision for integrating traditional stagecoach routes with the expanding railway network. Though she contributed sparingly to the conversation, her influence was evident in the comprehensive understanding of frontier transportation challenges that Jackson demonstrated. After the governor departed, they sat together in their parlor, the evening stretching comfortably before them. "You'll accept the position," Eleanor stated rather than asked. Jackson nodded. "It seems the natural progression from the work I've been doing, though it will mean significant changes to our original operation." "Change is inevitable," Eleanor replied, "The stagecoach era is giving way to railways, just as eventually railways will face their own successors. Adaptation has always been our strength." She rose and moved to the bookshelf, retrieving a leather portfolio that Jackson recognized as containing the original partnership agreement they had signed in Judge Wilson's office a decade earlier. The yellowed document spelled out the terms of their arrangement: protection and legitimacy exchanged between two desperate individuals with complicated pasts. "It seems like another lifetime," Jackson observed as she placed the document on the table between them. "In many ways it was," Eleanor agreed. "We were different people then, driven by immediate necessities rather than long-term vision." Jackson studied the signature of Jackson Miller, Outlaw, at the bottom of the page, a man who no longer existed except in memory and in Eleanor's private journals. "Do you ever regret our arrangement?" Eleanor considered the question seriously, as was her habit. "Regret suggests a wish for different choices. I've never indulged in such thinking. Each decision I've made, from my first forgery in Baltimore to our partnership, represented the best option available at that moment." "Not quite an answer," Jackson noted with a small smile. "Perhaps not," Eleanor acknowledged. "But I will say this. Of all the identities I've assumed throughout my life, Eleanor Blackwood has brought me the greatest satisfaction. This company, this community, this partnership, they represent a legacy I never anticipated, but value beyond measure." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "I've been considering legacies myself lately. The commissioner position would allow me to shape transportation policy throughout the territory for years to come, while ensuring Blackwood's place in that future," Eleanor added. "Strategic as always, Mr. Blackwood." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Henderson announcing evening visitors, Louis Porter and his wife Sarah, along with several other senior company employees who had become something like family over the years. They had come to celebrate the news of Jackson's nomination and to present Eleanor with a gift commemorating the company's upcoming 10th anniversary. The modest gathering extended into the evening, with stories and reminiscences flowing freely. Eleanor observed the interactions with quiet satisfaction, noting how the company had created connections that transcended mere business relationships. What had begun as a desperate pact between two individuals with dangerous secrets had grown into an enterprise that supported dozens of families and united communities across the territory. As their guests departed, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From Baltimore socialite to Civil War forger to frontier businesswoman, her life had encompassed more experiences than most could imagine. Yet it was this final chapter, built upon an arrangement of convenience with a wounded outlaw, that had ultimately provided the stability and purpose she had always sought. "A penny for your thoughts," Jackson said, as they stood on the porch watching their guests disappear into the night. Eleanor smiled. "I was thinking about beginnings and endings, how difficult it is to distinguish between them sometimes." "Philosophical this evening," Jackson observed. "Age grants certain privileges," she replied, reflection being chief among them. The night air carried the scent of approaching winter, though autumn still painted the landscape in brilliant colors. Eleanor knew she would likely see fewer changing seasons than most around her, but the knowledge brought peaceful acceptance rather than regret. "I've decided about my journals," she said suddenly. "They should be preserved, but sealed for 50 years after my passing. By then the events will be history rather than scandal, and the complete account may have value to those seeking to understand how the territory developed." Jackson nodded slowly. "A thoughtful solution, though I hope. The sealing date remains distant, as do I," Eleanor agreed. "There are still several chapters I wish to document." They remained on the porch a while longer, watching as lights throughout Silver Forks gradually dimmed. The community they had helped build settled into night's embrace, while the distant whistle of the evening train, heading east, served as reminder of the changing world beyond their frontier home. To beginnings disguised as endings, Jackson said quietly, echoing her earlier thought, and to partnerships formed in desperation that endure by choice, Eleanor added. The penniless outlaw and the stagecoach owner had long since vanished, transformed by time and circumstance into people neither could have imagined during that first desperate encounter. What remained was something far more valuable, a partnership that had not merely ensured their individual survival, but had helped shape the destiny of an entire territory. As they returned inside to the warmth of their shared home, both recognized the profound truth that had emerged from their unlikely beginning. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys start with a single step taken not toward a dream, but away from a nightmare. And sometimes those journeys lead to destinations more extraordinary than either traveler could have imagined. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.